All right, so you've probably seen the headlines. Iran has just rejected a temporary ceasefire. And that's a move that's got everyone on edge. But here's the thing. This isn't just a simple no. They've come back with a really specific set of conditions for peace. So what exactly are they asking for? And what does this all mean for the conflict? Let's get into it and break it all down, using reporting from the Times of India.
Yeah, this little fragment of a quote, it really gets right to the heart of the issue, doesn't it? I mean, Iran isn't just talking tough here. They formally, officially rejected a temporary truce. And that sends a super clear signal that, maybe the old rules of negotiation just don't apply anymore.
All right, so our first section, a truce rejected. And the subtitle says it all, really. A flat rejection of recent ceasefire proposals. So what exactly did they turn down? Let's take a closer look at the proposal that got such a decisive no.
So, you've got all these renewed diplomatic efforts happening, right? And amidst all that, Iran has officially rejected proposals for a temporary ceasefire. Now, to put that in perspective, we're talking about a 45-day truce that was on the table, reportedly discussed by the U.S. and regional mediators. That's a pretty significant offer, aimed at de-escalating things. But instead of being a step towards some kind of agreement, Tehran's response was just a swift and total rejection.
Okay, which brings us to the next big question. The problem with a pause. In other words, why is a temporary halt just a non-starter for Tehran? I mean, on the surface, why would you say no to a pause in the fighting? It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? So let's dig into the strategy behind this decision.
So let's just ask it directly. Why reject a pause in the fighting? Because from the outside looking in, you'd think any pause is a step in the right direction. It looks like progress. But there's a very specific logic coming from their side.
And here it is, straight from their foreign ministry spokesperson, Esmail Bagahi. He says a temporary ceasefire would allow its adversaries to regroup and prepare for further fighting. And that's really the core of their reasoning. For Iran, a truce like this isn't a path to peace. They see it as a strategic trap, basically giving their opponents a chance to rearm and get ready for the next round.
And this is the key distinction we really have to get our heads around. Their stated goal isn't just a pause. It's a permanent end to the war, to make sure it doesn't happen again. So, from their point of view, they're not rejecting peace. They're rejecting a pause. They see a temporary fix as just, kicking the can down the road, something that could actually make a longer war more likely. What they're aiming for is a full stop.
So, if a temporary pause is off the table, what are they putting on the table? Well, this leads us to Iran's 10-point plan. This is what Tehran is demanding instead. See, they haven't just said no to the U.S. proposal. They've come back with their own counteroffer. And this is where we get to see what they're really after.
In this slide really shows you just how big the gap is between the two sides. On the one hand, you have the rejected U.S. proposal, a 15-point plan that Iran's spokesperson called extremely excessive and unusual and illogical. Ouch. And on the other side, you've got Iran's counterproposal, a 10-clause plan that they say is designed for a permanent end to the war. So they're not even in the same ballpark.
So what's actually in this 10-point plan of theirs? Well, here are some of the key demands we know about. First, an end to conflicts in the region. And notice that's plural, conflicts, not just one. Second, a protocol for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, which, as you know, is a massive deal for global oil. Then, and this is a huge one, the lifting of sanctions. And finally, they're already talking about reconstruction. You can see how each one of these is a major sticking point for any negotiation.
But here's something we have to remember. These talks aren't happening in a vacuum. This is diplomacy under duress. There's this constant shadow of military threats hanging over the negotiations. And that just adds this incredibly dangerous layer of pressure to the whole thing.
And Iran's spokesperson, Esmail Bagahi, didn't mince words. He said, any diplomatic talks are absolutely incompatible with ultimatums, crimes, and threats to commit war crimes. I mean, that's about as blunt as you can get. They're basically saying, how can we have a real conversation when we're being threatened?
And just to be clear, this wasn't some abstract theoretical statement. The reporting shows this was a direct reference to Donald Trump's threat to bomb key Iranian infrastructure if Tehran didn't open the Strait of Hormuz. So, they're responding to a very specific, very real threat in their minds.
Now, it's not just the diplomats who are talking. This brings us to the military's warning, which really underscores the seriousness of this whole stalemate. Because Iran's military has been issuing its own statements, making it crystal clear what's at stake if these talks go nowhere.
First up, we have this message from the army spokesman Mohammad Akraminia, who says we can continue the war as long as the political authorities see fit. The message there is pretty straightforward, right? The military is ready, willing, and able to keep fighting for as long as the politicians give the order.
And then things get even more serious. This next warning comes from the Armed Forces spokesman, Ibrahim Zulfagari. He says that if attacks on civilian targets are repeated, retaliation would be on a much wider scale and losses would be several times greater. I mean, there's no ambiguity there. The message is unmistakable. If you keep attacking us, our response will be way more devastating.
So this is the standoff we're left with. It's a classic case where one side's idea of diplomacy is seen as the other side's ultimatum. You've got one side that sees a simple pause as a strategic trap, not a real solution. And you've got both sides backed by some pretty serious military threats. And it all boils down to this really tough question. When one side's diplomacy is another's ultimatum, how is peace even possible?